All right, thank you for joining us for Staying Alert with Christian Overcomers. And by now, most of you have seen that there's a lot of turmoil and unrest in Wisconsin today over public unions. And we're going to discuss whether or not unions are biblical and whether we truly need them. But before we begin, please listen for a brief moment as we share something with you.
Hey Ben, it's good to be back with you again this week.
You too.
Is there anything in the Bible that supports or doesn't support labor unions?
Well, I think there is a parable that Christ spoke in Matthew chapter 20. I think we'll just turn there and read it because it's a fascinating parable, which I think will prove that labor unions are not biblical, that we can do without them. We'll pick it up in verse 1, and I'm going to kind of read through this quickly, and I'll kind of explain it as we go. But verse 1, it says, "For the kingdom," Jesus speaking, "for the kingdom of heaven," you know, it's basically whenever he gives parables like the kingdom, he's talking about how it's governed, how it operates. And this parable can be taken on a more in-depth level as far as concerning, you know, the spiritual kingdom or the actual kingdom of heaven. But they also contain general principles in it on how nations should govern themselves. Mm-hmm. And so keep that in mind as we're reading. That's the angle we're going to look at it. "For the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is an householder, which went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard." This householder here is a business owner. Verse 2, "And when he had agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, he sent them into his vineyard." Now this penny obviously isn't equivalent to our penny today. It was a certain amount, average going rate for a day's worth of labor. Verse 3, "And he went out about the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right, I will give you. And they went their way." So we got two groups of people here. You have people that met with him right at the very beginning. They agreed upon a wage, and they went out to work. And then at about the third hour, another group came. Verse 4, I read that. They agreed, they went their way. Verse 5, "Again he went about the sixth and ninth hour, and did likewise." Okay, so he got more laborers. This is a business owner gathering workers. Mm-hmm. "And did likewise. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing idle, and saith unto them, Why stand ye here all day idle? Why aren't you working? You need to be employed." Verse 7, "They say unto him, Because no man hath hired us." We don't have a job. We're unemployed. "He saith unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right, that you shall receive." So, we got a nice business owner here providing jobs for people. He's saying, hey, I saw all these people idle. I went out and said, hey, why aren't you working? They said, we don't have a job. I said, okay, come work for me, and I'll make it right. Okay. Verse 8, "So when the even was come, for the end of the day, the Lord of the vineyard saith unto his steward," his manager, "Call the laborers and give them their hire, beginning from the first unto the last." The first ones that came all the way until the guys that came in at the end. Verse 9, "And when they came that were hired about the 11th hour, they received every man a penny." So here, what we're seeing here is Christ is going to, I believe, use this to prove a point to us. If you were following this parable, you would notice that the guys that came in at the first hour were given a penny, and the guys that only worked 1 hour that came in at the 11th hour were given a penny as well. So I think what we're going to read about here, and we'll explain it, is that Christ is showing us a stark contrast. It wouldn't seem fair from the surface. How come that guy is getting paid the same as us when we've been here working all day? Mm-hmm. And there's a good reason for that, and it'll be explained here. Verse 11, we'll go to verse 10. "But when the first came, they supposed that they should receive more, and they likewise received every man a penny." So they weren't very happy. Verse 11, "And when they had received it, they murmured against the good man of the house," the business owner. They're saying, hey, this isn't fair. They're gathering. Now check this out. We're talking about trade or labor unions. They're gathering together, murmuring in one voice against the business owner, saying, "These last have wrought but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal unto us, which have borne the burden and the heat of the day." Well, yeah, it would seem like it's not fair, but remember, Christ is teaching us a parable to prove a certain point to us. And I believe it relates to labor unions today. Verse 13, "But he answered one of them and said, Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst thou not agree with me for a penny?" So what he's saying to the guys that came at the first hour, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. You agreed with me that I would pay you a penny a day, penny for your day's worth of labor. So what are you murmuring about? What are you complaining about? Verse 4. Verse 14. "Take that thine is, and go thy way, and I will give unto this last, even unto thee." I'm going to pay him the same. Now, here's why he did this, to prove this point. Verse 15. "Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil because I am good?" In other words, this proves the point that the business owner can do whatever he wants. If he agrees with somebody, from the beginning that he's going to pay him a certain wage, he, is only obligated to do that. They don't necessarily have the right to gather together and murmur and, have collective bargaining, so to speak. If they don't like their pay, hey, they don't have to work for them. They can go work for somebody else.
Right.
Do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, there's a lot of points I can make. It also reminded me of the parable of the talents, where the master was able to determine what he wanted to pay and how much. And he actually went further, and he actually took from the lazy sluggard, the person that didn't have any return, and gave it to the hardworking person.
That's a good point.
I mean, the point is that the master, or the business owner, the evil business owner, should be able to decide what he's going to pay his workers. They don't need a middleman in their, collective bargaining. Yeah,
that's an excellent point, and I'm glad you brought that the parable of the talents up. What chapter is that? Do you remember? What
25.
25. So yeah, check that out if you want to too. That's a good one that relates to this. But I will just reiterate again, like Mark was saying, the business owner has the right, like Christ said, he says, "Is it not my right to do what I will? Is it not lawful to do what I want to do with my own money? Hey, if I want to pay this guy a penny, if I want to pay this guy 2 pennies, this guy 3, that's my business. He is the business owner." And but that parable, I think, strongly suggests that labor unions would not fit into the outlines laid out by God as far as rules and regulations for a nation or a people.
Right. And there's definitely a difference, too, between private unions and public unions.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff that we see happening today, for instance, in Wisconsin, these are public unions.
That's
and
right.
Their main debate, at least what they're saying, is that they don't really care about the pay and the benefits and all that, which I don't know if I necessarily believe, but they want their collective bargaining rights, because what the governor is trying to do is he's trying to put them on hold for the next 2 years. And they don't like that. They want to be able to bargain. But what a lot of people don't realize is, who are they bargaining against?
Yeah.
I mean, if there's these teachers and they want to make more money, and they're going to go and bargain and say, we want more money, or we want better benefits, or we want more for our pension or our health care, whatever it is, are they bargaining against the government or the evil business owner? Yeah. No, it's the taxpayers who foot the bill.
When you say evil business owner, you're saying that sarcastically as somebody in the union would believe,
Right, exactly, because that's what they say. It's the evil rich corporation, the evil rich, small business owner that's just taking all the money and they're paying their workers peanuts. But that's not necessarily the case in the public unions, because the people who are paying their salaries and their benefits are, first off, probably making less than they are for the most part overall. And they're coming and they're declaring, we want more, and it's the taxpayers who have to pick up the bill, the people that are actually working in the private sector.
Yeah. Well, that brings up an excellent point, because everybody in the private sector is suffering right now. People are being laid off, and not to mention people in the private sector with the jobs that are equivalent, government jobs that are equivalent to the ones in the private sector, the government ones are being paid a lot more.
Right.
And that doesn't make any sense, especially when everybody else is expected to cut their spending, cut their budgets, cut their lifestyle. And now here we have these people in these public unions, government workers, demanding that they still can get, pay increases or have the right to bargain for more money. When the government really doesn't, like, take for instance the government in Wisconsin, just like every other state pretty much, they don't have the money to even bargain with. There's nothing there. They're in the hole. I mean, how can you collectively bargain when there's nothing to bargain for? And what these people don't realize is they're allowing their own greed to override the general welfare of the stability of their state, their financial stability, because eventually it can't sustain itself. So eventually, if unions keep asking for money, keep digging, for instance, with the public people, they keep digging that hole. Eventually, nobody's going to have a job to do anything.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. So that kind of leads us into the next question that I had for you, and that is going back to God's law. What is there anything in the Ten Commandments or in God's law that you can think of that would apply to this situation?
Actually, there is two specific places that I can think of, is the 8th and the 10th commandment. And the 8th commandment is simple. It's thou shalt not steal. And that's what happens when, these people are taking from the taxpayer, in a time like this, and, receiving their, bargaining to get paid more for themselves. That's pretty close to stealing in my book. But
it is stealing.
I guess, it would be. I guess even what would be even more solid, I think, would be the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet. Because what they're doing is they're letting their greed of wanting, their benefits, their entitlements, override the welfare of their state. When I say welfare, I'm not talking about welfare policies. The condition of their state and of their neighbor. Because what they're doing is that would increase the taxes upon the private sector people, and now they're going to suffer for it. So that would be coveting, something that's really, I think, would really not be theirs in this situation. I think unions they're a disaster.
Right. It's
basically, putting your trust in some group of individuals to have your best interests in mind, when really, we know from a lot of the unions that they have communist ties, socialist ties, and really they're just using those workers to gain political power themselves.
Well, look, there's been situations where unions have destroyed good companies. Some would argue that you look at the automobile industry. Some would argue that the unions have made a disaster out of the automobile industry.
Such as GM and...
Exactly.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
So some would ask, how do we control unjust business owners, if that's what they really are? But you hear that, how do we control unjust business owners from not giving their workers a fair wage?
That's kind of a deep question, and it's rooted in the fabric or the morals of our nation. Because you can't, I can't help but think of the quote from William Penn, founder of Pennsylvania. He said that men will either be governed by God or ruled by tyrants. So if we're not going to allow God's law God's law and His Word to influence the morals of this nation, then we're going to have problems. And then, it's going to leave holes for people to want unions to correct it, some immoral, there are immoral business owners. Right. But you know what? If we as Christians and as people stopped working, we don't go and get jobs by those kind of people. If everybody did that consistently, those kind of people wouldn't be in business. You'd keep them out. But we've gone so far away from God's Word and His commandments that it leaves gaping holes, for that. But I guess my answer would be is we need to get back to God's commandments so that business owners, workers, and all everyone else is trying to let God govern their lives, rather than trying to get away with what they can, unless you have a tyrant or a dictator or a special administration in the government to enforce you to try to be moral, when we know that doesn't work. Government can't force those things.
Right. My last point, it's not really a question, but I find it also fascinating, you can hear this on talk radio today, that a lot of these unions are getting in bed with not so good people. There's a socialist agenda or even communist agenda going on out there, and you look at some of the symbols that some of these union workers and different people out there are holding up at these rallies that are going on, and they're exactly the same that the communists or the socialists are using.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting. The other interesting fact is that if you were to look, let's just take this teachers union, for example. They gave 100%, everyone that's in the union has to pay dues, and they can contribute dues to a political party if they want to when there's elections going on. And just this teachers union alone gave 100%, since the year 2008, 100% of those, whatever the contribution was out of those dues, to the Democrat Party.
Yeah.
Even if people in the union don't necessarily agree with that, and they don't have a say or a voice in where those dues go. I was once in a union, and I tried to go and make it so my dues weren't going towards that party, and they basically said, yeah, you can do that. You still have to pay us your union dues. You can't opt out if you want to. But on top of that, you're going to lose all your rights to come to our meetings and have a voice. I'm like, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So,
yeah, I guess going back to it, it's a political grab for the unions. And like you're saying about all the socialist and communist symbols, is that that's how communism basically took over in the first place. It's creating a class division or class warfare, where the workers of the world unite, against the evil business owners. And see, these unions they have an agenda deeper, higher up in these unions. The big bosses, they have an agenda deeper than the will of the workers.
Right.
And see, the workers, common people think, oh, they're there for me, they're fighting for me. But in reality, they're seeking to destroy, seeking to turn this nation upside down into a socialist, communist nation.
You're absolutely right.
And, they're destroying the fabric of our nation. So I guess that's what we had for you today. And this is kind of an important topic, because what we're seeing in Wisconsin could, start happening in other states, state after state after state, because many of our states, as well as our federal government, are hurting for cash. They haven't managed their books well. We've been been full of wasteful spending, and it's just crazy. It's crazy to see what's happening, and a lot of this stems from, or could be a lot of this could be avoided if our nation adhered to God's law and His commandments. For one, the coveting is a huge thing. We would not want that which we did not earn. And if we didn't want to work for somebody, we'd go work for somebody else. And that's just how it worked. But we just want to thank you for joining us for this segment of Staying Alert with Christian Overcomers.